Decalogue, in my opinion, is the greatest television show ever created. I know that's kind of a big statement, but it's true. Nothing I have seen has reached the level of mastery on display in this fantastic series. And honestly, I don't think anything ever will. I believe that this is Krzysztof Kieślowski's crowning achievement, his magnum opus. And after seeing this entire series, I feel like I have peered into the mind of a genius. I have seen fantastic television shows in the past, but every show usually has at least one bad episode or season. There's not a single bad episode in Decalogue. You could say that's due to there being only 10 episodes in the series, but I think it's because of the incredible amount of work and effort Krzysztof puts into each one of these episodes. If you didn't already know, the premise of the series is that each episode centers around one of the 10 commandments. And this isn't some Zack Snyder crap. No, each commandment is integrated very subtly into each episode. And it's really fascinating how he was able to integrate these giant concepts into these really small day-in-the-life stories. And I loved every single episode of Decalogue. One of the reasons I love this show so much is because of the fantastic writing. The writing in this show is some of the best I've ever seen. Not just for a TV show. It's just pure genius. And while all 10 episodes are fairly short and none of them are connected, I still feel like I know each of these characters inside and out, because the acting, the writing, the directing, the cinematography are all working together to create this masterpiece of filmmaking. And so in this video, I'm going to rank every episode of the Decalogue. And you do not need to watch these episodes in any particular order, because they are really not connected in any way. So if you want to watch number 1 first, go right ahead. Although I would personally recommend watching them in chronological order. Okay, starting out with the least best. Now don't get me wrong, this is still a fantastic episode, and would probably be the best episode in any ordinary television series. Really, my only problem with this episode is that for a lot of it, you don't really know where it's going, and on a first watch, it can feel a little boring, but at the end, you get that aha moment when you realize kind of why the episode felt like that. There's some really fantastic moments of camera work in this one, especially the scenes that happen in the church. All in all, a really sad, great episode of Decalogue that definitely earns its place among the rest. It is not flawless, but it is definitely an achievement. Moving on to the next episode. Not to say that that other episode wasn't great, but this is where the series starts to get masterful. The ideas that he's exploring about what it means to have control over the life of a human. I think Krzysztof is trying to say that the line has been blurred between man and God. What it means to have control over whether something lives or dies. This goes for every episode, but wow, the cinematography was like really good. Some shots I just felt hypnotized. The only complaint I could see someone potentially having is that it could feel a little boring in some parts. That wasn't really an issue for me, but I could definitely understand if someone had that viewpoint. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but literally everything that could have been done well was done well. A little bit ago, I said that these episodes were very loosely connected, and in this episode, you can see someone from the first episode walking around the apartment building. Okay, moving on to the next best one. This is one of those episodes that just makes you feel things that you didn't know were possible. The way he develops this father and daughter dynamic is so unique and interesting. The sad yet hopeful nature of this episode really separates it from the rest. This episode asks questions like, what is a parent's responsibility? Are white lies helping a child more than hurting them? What does being a parent even mean? Does being blood related even matter? And in some cases, does the truth even matter? This episode hurts my brain because of how complex it is. Because on the surface level, this is just a story between a father and a daughter, but it has so much going on underneath. And that goes for every single episode in this series. Well, I'm gonna move on to talking about the next episode. This was a solid episode. I know that I'm repeating myself, and I probably will again later in this video, but the cinematography is absolutely genius. I feel like for this, you could almost watch it on mute and you could still figure out what's going on just through the symbolism, through the visuals. I feel like this episode is tackling ideas about what love really is. Is it only physical or is it only emotional? Like I said, some really interesting ideas. Definitely not the best episode, but it earns its place in the series. Okay, moving on. Admittedly, this is the most straightforward and accessible one out of the series, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. I think my favorite part about this episode is the characters, and how the conflict isn't really about the child, but it's more about this mother and daughter. This episode is kinda dealing with the same themes as the fourth one, but in this one it's more focusing on themes such as what makes a child yours, and what's the responsibility over having control over a human life. Overall, another great episode, and if you're looking for a starting place, this might be a good one. Like the rest of the series, this was a very intelligent episode. In this episode, two brothers mourn their father's death and decide to sell his stamp collection, but they soon find out that it's worth millions of dollars. Some very interesting ideas are being presented in this episode, such as how physical objects can represent a man's entire life. And is it our responsibility to carry out the dead's legacy? Or since they're dead, just let them die? And probably the best way to end the best television show of all time is with the line, "It's a series." And yes, I realize I'm going through these episodes fairly quickly, but I do not want this to be a 30-minute long video. Okay, if you were to consider these next 4 episodes movies, these would be some of my favorite films of all time. A lot of the episodes in Decalogue have some sexual themes, such as the 4th and the 9th one, but this by far has the most. This and the 5th episode were both given the feature film treatment by Christoph, but then he shortened them down to their own episode of Decalogue. But he did change a few things. For example, in this one, the ending was completely different in the feature film version. This, like a lot of other episodes in the series, is fairly sad. There's just a lot of sexual anxiety that brews throughout this entire episode. In most stories, the Peeping Tom character wouldn't have been given this much depth, but Christoph really fleshes him out. Like I said in the intro, these characters are just so well fleshed out and complex. With each of these episodes, everything is purposeful. Everything has a metaphorical purpose. It's just amazing to me how something can be so perfect. Okay, I'll stop gushing. I'll move on. This is honestly one of the best things that is about World War II I've seen ever. And I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm overhyping this series, but it really is just that good. This episode is dealing with themes such as what it takes to give forgiveness and how people can use the word of God in selfish ways. This episode really puts you in the shoes of these characters. You really feel what they're feeling. The acting is fantastic as always. With the main character, you can really tell the weight she's carrying on her shoulders. I haven't mentioned this before, but I just love how he shoots things. It reminds me of David Fincher. Very objective, very cold, very distant, but then in some points it can feel extremely intimate. It's just insane how it works so well. This episode was a deep dive into the regrets of these characters, and I absolutely loved it. This is probably the most disturbing and the closest episode to being a thriller. And this episode emphasizes that Decalogue's not really something you put on when you want to feel happy. This deals with the mentally ill and the flawed criminal justice system. This episode is so good that it was very close to being number 1. It's just this slow, disturbing buildup of inevitable dread, and it gets quite brutal. Have you ever had that feeling where something's so good you feel unworthy to be watching it? That's the feeling I get when I watch Decalogue. This episode is also very, very entertaining. My eyes were glued to the screen. Overall, this episode is another fine addition to the Decalogue collection. Okay, can we get a drum roll for the best episode in the series? No? Okay, whatever. I hate to say it, but the first one's the best. And that may sound like a bad thing because it might make every other episode feel inferior, but I think this episode really sets the tone for what you're about to experience. I've been talking about cinematography throughout the entire video, and I think this one has the best. There are some really, really striking shots in this. And child acting can usually suck, but this is a fantastic child performance. In the episode, the father of this young boy is very logical. He doesn't believe in religion, and the boy is more leaning to his father's point of view, while the mother is more religious. And I think this episode is really important for basically everyone to watch. People who are extremely religious and people who are extremely logical, because I think there's things that both sides can learn from watching this. In the episode, the father has a quote-unquote crisis of faith when he realizes that his mathematical equations basically caused his son to die. And out of the entire series, this is the only one that got me to cry. It's really, really sad, and I think the music emphasizes this to a T. And I don't know how I haven't mentioned the music before. The music in the show is phenomenal. It's so sad and so beautiful at the same time. It fits the tone of the show perfectly. And there's some really good foreshadowing in this episode. Pay attention to the ink. This is the greatest television episode of all time. It's an astounding achievement in the world of filmmaking. And I strongly urge you to check this episode out as soon as you get the chance. And without a moment of hesitation, Decalogue, of course, gets 100% toothpaste meter. In my opinion, Decalogue is, and most likely will always be, the greatest television show of all time. And of course, I strongly recommend it to whoever is watching this video. So if you have the opportunity to see Decalogue, please do, because it is a one-of-a-kind experience. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.